The power had been out for 20 minutes when Marissa heard the knock. She'd been standing at the kitchen window of her small house on the outskirts of Fontana, watching the storm tear through the San Bernardino foothills with a violence that seemed personal. March storms in Southern California weren't supposed to be like this, weren't supposed to rattle windows and turn the streets into rivers. But this one had rolled down from the mountains with the kind of fury that made you believe nature was trying to settle old scores. The knock came again, harder this time, urgent against the drum of rain on the roof. Marissa hesitated. It was barely 7 in the evening, but the storm had turned the world dark as midnight. Through the front window, she could see nothing but sheets of water, illuminated by occasional lightning. She wasn't expecting anyone. No one came out this far unless they had to. She opened the door. The man on her porch was drenched. Water streamed from his leather jacket, pooled at his boots, dripped from the ends of his dark hair plastered to his skull. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe in his early 40s, with a weathered face that suggested he'd spent more time outdoors than in. The leather cut he wore bore the unmistakable patches of the Hells Angels, skull and wings, territorial rockers, years of road dust ground into the creases. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled between them, carrying spray that stung Marissa's face. "Ma'am," he said finally, his voice rough but polite, "I don't mean to bother you. My bike died about half a mile back. I just need a place to dry off for a bit. Maybe use a phone if you've got one that works." Marissa's hand tightened on the doorframe. She was 34 years old, had been a widow for 16 months, and lived alone in a house that still smelled like her dead husband's cologne in the bedroom closet. Every reasonable instinct told her to apologize, to tell this stranger she couldn't help, to close the door and lock it. But something in his eyes stopped her. They were grey, she noticed, the colour of the storm itself, and they looked tired, not threatening, just tired. "Phone's out too," she heard herself say, "but you can come in, dry off." He nodded once, a small gesture of gratitude. "Appreciate it." She stepped back, and he crossed the threshold, bringing with him the smell of rain and leather and motor oil. Water dripped from him onto the hardwood floor her husband had refinished 3 summers ago. "Wait here," Marissa said, already moving toward the hallway closet. "I'll get you a towel." "Do." When she returned, he was still standing exactly where she'd left him, as if he understood the boundary he'd crossed by entering and didn't want to push it further. She handed him 2 towels, one large, one smaller, and he nodded his thanks. "You can hang your jacket in the bathroom," she said, pointing down the hall. "First door on the right." "Yes, ma'am." While he was gone, Marissa lit the 3 emergency candles she kept in the kitchen and set them on the coffee table in the living room. The flickering light pushed back the darkness just enough to make the space feel less oppressive. Outside, thunder cracked so loud it sounded like something splitting open. He emerged a few minutes later, jacket gone, wearing only a black t-shirt and jeans. His arms were corded with muscle and ink. She caught glimpses of skulls, wings, script she couldn't quite read in the candlelight. He dried his hair as best he could, and it stuck up in places, making him look younger, more vulnerable than the figure who'd stood on her porch. "You can sit," Marissa said, gesturing to the couch. "I was about to make some coffee. It'll be instant, but the stove's gas." "You don't have to do that." "I'm making it anyway." She left him in the living room and busied herself in the kitchen, grateful for something to do with her hands. The kettle hissed on the burner. Through the doorway, she could see him sitting stiffly on the edge of the couch, hands on his knees, gaze fixed on the candles. He looked like a man trying very hard not to take up too much space. When she returned with 2 mugs, he accepted his with both hands, cradling it as if the warmth mattered more than the taste. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." Marissa sat in the armchair across from him, the coffee table and its candles between them like a buffer zone. The silence stretched. Outside, the rain hammered down with renewed intensity. "How long have you lived out here?" he asked finally. 8 years. My husband and I bought the place when we got married." The words came out automatically, factual, stripped of emotion. He passed away last year. The biker nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Thank you. Another silence. Marissa sipped her coffee and wondered why she'd told him that. She hadn't told the checkout girl at the grocery store, or the mailman, or any of the neighbors she barely knew. But somehow it had seemed important that this stranger understand she was alone by circumstance, not choice. My name's Marissa, she said. Cole. Where were you headed, Cole? Nowhere in particular. Just riding. He paused, looking down at his coffee. Sometimes you just need to be moving, you know. She did know. She'd spent the last 16 months in motion, cleaning, organizing, rearranging, anything to avoid sitting still long enough for the grief to catch up. But she only nodded. They talked in fits and starts after that, the conversation moving carefully around the edges of their lives. She learned he'd been riding for 23 years, that he'd grown up in San Bernardino, that he worked as a mechanic at a shop in Riverside. He learned she taught second grade at a school in Fontana, that she liked her coffee black, that she'd lived in California her whole life. Neither of them talked about the obvious things. His colors, her wedding ring she still wore, the reasons people like them ended up sitting across from each other on a night like this. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up. I should check the weather, Marissa said, reaching for her phone before remembering. Right, no service. It'll pass, Cole said. They always do. An hour became 2, and the storm continued its assault on Fontana with relentless determination. Marissa had offered Cole another cup of coffee, which he'd accepted, and they'd settled into a rhythm of conversation that felt oddly natural for two people who'd been strangers 90 minutes ago. The candlelight made the living room feel smaller, more intimate. Shadows moved across the walls with each flicker, and the sound of rain had become a constant backdrop, almost soothing in its consistency. You must think it's strange, Cole said suddenly. A guy like me knocking on your door. Marissa looked at him over the rim of her mug. I think a lot of things are strange lately. You're not the strangest. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair enough. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Why did you choose my house? There are others closer to the road. Cole was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing the handle of his mug. I saw your porch light, only one still on. Figured if someone left their light on during a storm like this, they might be the kind of person who'd help, or the kind too scared to go outside and turn it off. Maybe, but I took the chance. Something in the way he said it made Marissa think he was talking about more than just a porch light. She wanted to ask what chances he'd taken in his life, what risks had left those tired lines around his eyes, but the question felt too personal, too probing for the careful distance they'd maintained. Instead, she said, What's it like? Riding, I mean. Really riding, not just commuting. Cole leaned back slightly, considering. It's freedom, I guess, but not the kind people think. It's not about running from things. It's about being present, you know. When you're on a bike, you can't be thinking about yesterday or tomorrow. You have to be right there in that moment, or you'll end up in a ditch. That sounds terrifying. Sometimes it is, but it's also the only time I feel completely awake. Marissa understood that better than she wanted to admit. For 16 months, she'd been sleepwalking through her life, going through motions that felt scripted, predetermined. Wake up, shower, dress, teach, come home, repeat. Nothing required her to be present. Nothing demanded she feel anything at all. My husband used to say something similar about flying, she found herself saying. He was a pilot, small planes mostly. He'd take me up sometimes and he'd have this look on his face, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. I never understood it until he was gone. Then I realized he was probably the only one of us who was ever really living. The words surprised her. She hadn't talked about David like this to anyone. His parents had wanted to reminisce, to keep him alive through stories, but Marissa had found it unbearable. Her friends had eventually stopped asking, but here, in the half-dark with a stranger, the truth had simply slipped out. What happened to him? Cole asked quietly. Heart attack, 41 years old, jogging through the neighborhood on a Saturday morning, just collapsed. She set her mug down, her hands suddenly needing to be empty. They said it was genetic, something that wouldn't have shown up until it did. I keep thinking about all the things we worried about. Him flying, the plane maintenance, the weather conditions. Never once worried about him jogging. You can't protect against everything. I know, but knowing doesn't help. Cole nodded, and in that small gesture, Marissa sensed he understood. Not just intellectually, but in the way someone who'd lost things understood. "What about you?" she asked. "What are you running from or riding toward?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's the question, isn't it? I've been trying to figure that out for about 3 years now. What happened 3 years ago? My daughter stopped talking to me." He said it matter-of-factly, but Marissa heard the pain underneath. "She was 17, didn't approve of the life I'd chosen, gave me an ultimatum. The club or her. I thought she'd come around eventually. She didn't. I'm sorry." "Yeah. Me too." He looked down at his hands, at the rings on his fingers, the scars across his knuckles. "I tell myself I made the right choice, that you can't let someone control you like that, even your own kid. But some nights I wonder if pride is worth what it cost." The honesty of it struck Marissa like a physical thing. Here was a man in leather and patches, covered in tattoos, wearing the insignia of a motorcycle club that most people crossed the street to avoid. And he was admitting doubt, regret, the kind of vulnerability most men spent their lives hiding. "Does the riding help?" she asked. "Sometimes. Tonight it landed me in a stranger's living room during a storm, so I'm calling it a win." Marissa laughed, actually laughed, and it startled them both. The sound felt foreign in her house, like something that didn't belong there anymore. But Cole smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "What made you laugh?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe the absurdity of it all. You on my couch, me telling you things I haven't told anyone. This whole night feels like something that's happening to someone else. Maybe it is. Maybe we're both someone else right now." The candles flickered as a particularly strong gust of wind rattled the windows. Marissa pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how cold the house had become without the heater running. "You're cold," Cole observed. "I'm fine. There's a blanket behind you on the back of the chair." She'd forgotten about that blanket, David's favorite, the one he'd wrap himself in during football games. She reached back and pulled it over her lap, grateful for the warmth, trying not to think about the last person who'd used it. "Can I ask you something now?" Cole said. "Okay. Why did you let me in?" "Really?" Marissa thought about it, about the moment she'd stood in the doorway looking at this rain-soaked stranger. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe because saying no would have been safe, and I'm tired of safe. Or maybe I just didn't want to be alone with myself for another night. That's a dangerous reason to open your door. I know. But you didn't seem dangerous." "How could you tell?" "Your eyes. They looked like mine, I think. Tired." Cole held her gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The acknowledgement that they were both people who'd been through things, who carried weight, who'd learned that survival sometimes meant just getting through one more day. "Thank you," he said finally, "for taking the chance. Thank you for knocking." The storm raged on outside, but inside the small living room with its flickering candles, something had shifted. The air felt less heavy, the silence less oppressive. Two strangers had somehow become something more than that, even if neither could have named exactly what. It was close to 10 when the rain finally began to ease. The thunder had rolled eastward into the desert, leaving behind a steady drizzle that tapped against the windows like hesitant fingers. Marissa had lit 2 more candles as the first set burned low, and the living room had taken on the quality of a space outside of time, disconnected from the world beyond its walls. Cole had been quiet for the last 15 minutes, staring into his empty coffee mug with the focused attention of someone reading fortunes in tea leaves. Marissa had learned to recognize that look over the past few hours. It meant he was working something out in his head, choosing whether or not to give voice to whatever he was thinking. I should probably go soon, he said eventually. Storm's letting up. You could wait until it stops completely. Your bike isn't going anywhere. No, but I've imposed enough. You haven't imposed at all. Marissa surprised herself with how much she meant it. The thought of him leaving, of the house returning to its usual silence, felt suddenly unbearable. Besides, you'll be soaked again before you get 100 yards. Cole looked toward the window, at the rain still streaking down the glass. I've been soaked before. I'm sure you have, but there's no rush, is there, unless someone's waiting for you? No one's waiting. He said it simply, without self-pity, just stating a fact. Then stay a little longer, please. The last word came out smaller than she'd intended, revealing more need than she was comfortable showing. But Cole's expression softened, and he settled back into the couch. All right, a little longer. They fell into a different kind of silence then, one that didn't require filling. Marissa tucked her feet under herself on the chair, David's blanket still across her lap, and let her mind drift. She thought about all the nights she'd spent in this room alone, the television on for noise, a book in her lap she never really read. She'd told herself she was adjusting, that grief had a timeline, and she was somewhere in the middle of it, that eventually the house wouldn't feel so empty. But tonight, with a stranger on her couch and candles burning low, the house felt different. Not less empty exactly, but less lonely. There was a distinction there she was only beginning to understand. What are you thinking about? Cole asked. Honestly, how strange it is that you're here. How strange it is that I'm not afraid. Should you be? Probably. You could be anyone. So could you. Fair point. She smiled. What are you thinking about? Cole rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture of discomfort. I'm thinking I should have checked my bike more carefully before heading out, and I'm thinking I'm glad I didn't. Why? Because otherwise I'd be somewhere else right now, probably in a shitty motel room watching bad TV instead of here. This is better than a motel room. Much better. He met her eyes. Strange as it is, this is the most normal I've felt in a long time. Marissa understood exactly what he meant. Normal had become such a relative concept after David died. People had told her she'd find a new normal, that life would eventually settle into patterns that made sense. But nothing had felt normal in 16 months. Until tonight, sitting in candlelight with a man she'd known for 3 hours, everything feeling simultaneously surreal and more real than anything she'd experienced in recent memory. Can I tell you something? She said. Something I haven't told anyone. Of course. I'm angry at him. At David. For dying. For leaving me. For jogging that morning when he could have stayed home. I know it's not rational, but I'm furious with him. And I feel guilty about being angry, which makes me angrier, and the whole thing just circles around and around, until I can't think straight. Cole listened without interrupting, his attention complete. Everyone expects me to be sad, Marissa continued, the words coming faster now. And I am sad, terribly sad. But mostly I'm just angry, and I don't know what to do with it. I can't tell his parents, can't tell our friends. They all want to remember him as this perfect person, and he was wonderful. But he also left me here alone, and I hate him for it sometimes. She stopped, breathing hard, surprised by her own vehemence. The admission hung in the air between them, too raw to take back. I get that, Cole said quietly. After my daughter stopped talking to me, I was angry at her for months. Angry that she couldn't understand, couldn't see past the patches to who I actually was. Then I was angry at myself for being angry at her. Eventually I realized the anger was just easier than admitting I was heartbroken. When did you stop being angry? I'm not sure I have. But I've made peace with it, I guess. Accepted that some things don't resolve. They just exist. You carry them. Marissa thought about that, about the weight she'd been carrying, trying to organize it into something manageable. Maybe that was the problem. She'd been trying to process it, to move through stages, to arrive somewhere. Maybe there was nowhere to arrive. That's depressing, she said, or freeing. Depends how you look at it. How do you look at it? Cole was quiet for a moment. I look at it like this. I can spend the rest of my life wishing things were different, or I can accept what is and figure out how to live with it. Some days I'm better at it than others. And today I'm all right. Better than all right, actually. The way he said it made something shift in Marissa's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket or the coffee. She realized with a start that she felt it too, better than all right. For the first time in 16 months, she wasn't measuring her emotional state against what it should be, wasn't cataloguing the ways she was failing to cope. She was just here, present, alive. "This is going to sound strange," she said, "but thank you for letting me say all that. Nothing strange about it. Sometimes you just need someone to listen who doesn't have expectations about what you're supposed to feel. Is that what you needed when you knocked on my door?" Cole considered the question. "I don't think I knew what I needed, but yeah, maybe that was part of it." Outside, the rain had slowed to a light patter, almost peaceful now. Marissa glanced at the window and saw the first hints of clearing sky, stars visible through breaks in the clouds. The storm was ending. Soon Cole would leave, would walk back to his bike and ride off into whatever came next. This strange, suspended moment would end, and tomorrow would arrive with all its usual demands. The thought made her chest tight. "The rain's stopping," she observed unnecessarily. "Yeah." Neither of them moved. "I should let you get some rest," Cole said, but he didn't stand. "I won't sleep anyway. I haven't slept well since—" She trailed off. "But you're probably exhausted." "Not really. Wired, if anything." Marissa understood that too. The night had taken on an electric quality, every moment charged with something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't attraction exactly, or not only that. It was connection. Recognition, the rare experience of being seen by someone who asked nothing in return. "Cole," she said, his name feeling strange and intimate on her tongue. "I'm glad your bike broke down. I'm glad you knocked on my door." He looked at her then, really looked at her, with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Me too, Marissa." The candles flickered, throwing shadows across his face, and Marissa wondered what she looked like to him in this light. A widow wrapped in her dead husband's blanket, pale and tired and probably more vulnerable than she should be with a stranger. But Cole didn't look away, didn't seem to find anything lacking in what he saw. "I should go," he said again, and this time he stood. Marissa stood too, the blanket falling from her lap, suddenly aware that the night was ending and she wasn't ready. But what could she say? Ask him to stay? Until when? Until the morning? Until she figured out what this feeling was? "I'll get your jacket," she said instead. Cole's jacket was still damp but wearable. He shrugged it on in the bathroom, and when he emerged, he was once again the man who'd knocked on her door hours ago, patches and leather and all the signifiers that marked him as other. But Marissa no longer saw those things first. She saw the person underneath, the man who'd sat on her couch and listened and understood. They stood in the entryway, neither quite ready for goodbye. The candles had burned down to stubs, and Marissa had turned on her phone's flashlight to compensate. The white LED light was harsh after the softness of the candlelight, making everything feel more real, more final. "Thank you again," Cole said, "for everything. You're welcome. Be careful out there. The roads will be slick." "I'll be fine. I've ridden in worse." "I'm sure you have." They were being formal again, polite, two strangers observing the rituals of parting. But the easiness of the last few hours hadn't disappeared entirely. It lingered in the air between them, in the way neither quite met the other's eyes. Cole reached for the door handle, then paused. "Marissa, can I—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider. "Never mind. What is it?" "I was going to ask if I could come back sometime, check on you maybe, but that's probably not appropriate." Something in Marissa's chest squeezed tight. "Why wouldn't it be appropriate?" "Because I'm nobody to you. Because I showed up out of nowhere and I'll disappear the same way. Because you're dealing with enough without some biker inserting himself into your life." "What if I didn't mind?" Cole looked at her then, searching her face for something. Wouldn't that be complicated? Everything's complicated. That doesn't mean it's wrong. He smiled, sad and knowing. You don't know me, Marissa. You don't know the things I've done, the life I live. You opened your door to me tonight because of a storm and good instincts, but in the daylight, you'd probably see it differently. You don't know what I'd see. Maybe not, but I know what I am, and I know you deserve better than complicated. The words hurt more than they should have, given that this man had been a stranger 4 hours ago. But they did hurt, because they dismissed something that had felt real, something that had made her feel alive. That's not your decision to make, she said quietly. Fair enough. Cole opened the door. Cool air rushed in, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and asphalt. But I'll make you a deal. If you still want complicated in a week, there's a place called Ruby's on Valley Boulevard. I'm there most Friday nights around 8. If you show up, I'll buy you a coffee. And if I don't, then you made the smart choice. And tonight was just what it was. 2 people getting through a storm. He stepped out onto the porch, and Marissa followed, her bare feet cold on the wet concrete. The rain had stopped completely now, and the sky was clearing fast, revealing a field of stars that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness of the storm. Cole walked to the edge of the porch steps, then turned back. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Then he climbed the steps again, closing the distance between them until he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell leather and rain and something underneath that was just him. He leaned in, his mouth near her ear, close enough that his breath stirred her hair. What he whispered was so quiet that later, lying in bed, Marissa would wonder if she'd imagined it, but she knew she hadn't. She'd heard every word with perfect clarity, had felt them settle into her chest like stones into water. You made me remember what it feels like to want to stay. Then he was gone, down the steps and into the night, his footsteps fading down the driveway. Marissa stood frozen on the porch, her hand pressed to her chest as if she could hold the words there, keep them from escaping. She heard his motorcycle start, the engine roaring to life in the quiet night, saw the single headlight cut through the darkness as he turned onto the road, watched until the light disappeared around the bend, swallowed by distance and the night. Only then did she go back inside. The house felt different now. The candles had burned out, and she moved through the rooms in darkness, not bothering to turn on lights. In the living room, she picked up the coffee mugs, carried them to the kitchen sink. His was still slightly warm. She looked at the couch where he'd sat, at the dent in the cushion that would be gone by morning, picked up David's blanket and folded it carefully, held it against her chest for a moment before putting it back. Then she walked to her bedroom, lay down on top of the covers, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. You made me remember what it feels like to want to stay. The words played on repeat in her mind. Not a declaration of desire, not a promise of anything. Just a simple truth spoken in the space between them, an admission that something had shifted, that the night had mattered. He hadn't touched her, hadn't kissed her, hadn't even held her hand. There had been no moment of crossing lines, no breach of the careful distance they'd maintained, just conversation and coffee and honesty in the dark. But God, those words. Marissa closed her eyes and felt it all wash over her. The relief of not being alone, the terror of feeling something again, the impossible complexity of what had passed between them. She thought about Ruby's on Valley Boulevard, about Friday nights and coffee, and the choice Cole had laid at her feet. She thought about David, about the promises she'd made to him, about the life they'd built that had ended on a Saturday morning in a suburban street. She wondered what he would think of tonight, of her letting a stranger into their house, of her wanting to see him again. She thought about Cole's daughter, about his admission of doubt, about the way he'd looked at her and seen something worth being honest with, about his eyes that looked like hers, tired but not quite defeated. Most of all, she thought about those whispered words and what they meant. Not that he wanted her, Not that he was making any claim. Just that she'd reminded him of something he'd forgotten, that her presence had awakened something he'd thought was lost. And in doing so, he'd awakened something in her too. Dawn was breaking when Marissa finally got up. She walked to the window and looked out at her street, at the houses where people were probably sleeping peacefully, their lives undisturbed by storms or strangers. The sky was clear now, washed clean, everything sharp and bright in the early light. She didn't know if she'd go to Ruby's on Friday. Didn't know if wanting something was enough reason to reach for it. Didn't know if she was ready to step out of the safety of her grief into something uncertain and possibly painful. But she knew she'd spend the week thinking about it, knew those words would echo through her days and keep her awake at night. Knew that something had changed irrevocably, that Cole had walked into her house for a few hours and left her with a possibility she couldn't ignore. You made me remember what it feels like to want to stay, and he'd made her remember what it felt like to want someone too. As the sun rose over Fontana, burning away the last remnants of the storm, Marissa made herself coffee and sat at her kitchen table. Friday was 5 days away. 5 days to decide if desire suggested by memory was enough. 5 days to choose between safe and alive. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug and let herself imagine it, walking into Ruby's, finding him there, saying yes to whatever complicated looked like. The thought terrified her. The thought thrilled her. The thought kept her awake just as he'd known it would.